All mobiles stand by for rapid fire. All mobiles, fire.
And darts cannot harm me. My wings are like a shield of steel.
ATIP also developed a hypothesis that the UAPs might have an Achilles heel, a vulnerability that the American military can exploit.
A device called a magnetron generates high-powered radio waves. An antenna focuses these waves into a narrow beam and continually shoots them into the sky.
You Homo sapiens and your guns.
Hello pals, welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be quite a big topic. This video is going to be a two-part series about how to shoot down a UFO. I know that sounds quite crazy, but from recent evidence and whistleblowers, it would appear that not only is this something which does take place, it's something which has taken place for quite a long time. We've heard from David Grush, the phenomenal whistleblower who bravely testified before Congress a couple of years ago. And now we have what everybody said they wanted, which is a first-hand witness, somebody that actually participated in the recovery of UFOs. So, what makes this different than other people with extraordinary claims? Well, frankly, one of the weirder parts about it is the people that are backing this whistleblower up and the politics involved there, which makes it more compelling. Plus, I've got a bit of a personal skin in the game, if you like, which I'll get into later. So for now, grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get into it. This is Dr. Stephen Greer, a medical doctor who, despite not having worked directly for the government, has advised several presidents and agencies and has done incredible work in unearthing evidence, such as the Wilson Davis notes, which are now an infamous part of UFO history, but also empowering whistleblowers and witnesses to come forward as the founder of the Disclosure Project. It's very fair to say that he's not without his critics, but he's done phenomenal things for the cause as a whole. This is Lou Elizondo, the Pentagon's former head of ATIP and ORSAP, which was their groups studying the UFO phenomena. He's done phenomenal things to bring evidence forward, like the infrared footage that we're also familiar with, leaking that to the New York Times, and has also spent a great deal of time appearing in media such as podcasts, news outlets, and television to highlight the UAP topic. Whilst he too has his fair share of critics and criticism, he's even testified to Congress in the last hearing about a UFO recovery program, amongst other incredible topics. Now, the only problem with these two is that they hate each other and have both taken several opportunities to criticize and attempt to discredit each other, some more personal than others. Now, this is not a channel for drama, but as you are going to see, this, in a bizarre turn of events, adds credibility to the third person, which we'll get to shortly. But first, here's a little clip of Lou talking about Stephen, followed by a clip of Stephen talking about Lou.
We can get to that. And then also you mentioned that the charlatans of the world will be shown to be charlatans. And I, again, don't know much about this UFO community, but people in the comments were saying, did he mean Stephen Greer?
Now, as far as the charlatans, I'm not going to give any attention to individual charlatans because they already have enough attention. They know exactly who I'm referring to. These are individuals who have made a cottage industry, a career of taking people's hard-earned money and deceiving them. And not only deceiving them, but having them sign non-disclosure agreements to make sure they don't tell the world that they've been deceived. And preying upon people who for whatever reason believe in them. people who say my narrative is the only narrative, and anybody else who tells you otherwise, is trying to hurt you. I have all the answers. I have the solution. Anybody who says that, I think is a charlatan, and I think we need to be very, very mindful of that. They're very dangerous, and they're dangerous for several reasons. Because if they're lying to you about that, they're probably lying to you about other things in their life, their past life and their current life, which may or may not come to light at some point. These are people who have taken advantage of people for a very long time, and you have to be careful.
What else are the motivations of some of these charlatans, or potentially could be their motivation, other than financial?
Well, look at any religious
influence?
charlatan. It's the same thing. It's a cult of personality. It's somebody who, for whatever reason, thinks it's all about them, and they manage the narrative. It goes to the basic core of pride and ego in human beings, and narcissistic behavior. Real, true, deep psychological issues. Some sociopathic, to be honest with you.
When you're talking about these disinformation agents, these knocks, I have somebody that comes to mind, and we were talking about him at lunch. Lou Elizondo. Is he one of them?
Oh, of course. I mean, as soon as he emerged on the stage, I had a very senior guy at CIA who's worked this issue since 1979 contact me about that problem. But remember, the only way that you can control at this point all this coming out, because of what we have and what we're pushing forward through media, is to control the narrative, the spin. So the people coming forward who get an all-access pass on to, say, 60 Minutes or something like that, are people cleared by this same illegal, corrupt organization, because they'll tell the public, yes, the UAPs are real, but we don't know what they are. Well, this is an absolute lie. We absolutely know what they are. Some of them are ours, man-made, and are confused quite frequently with the others, which are of extraterrestrial origin, or ETVs, extraterrestrial vehicles. And those operatives are taught very well to take an issue, grab it, capture it, and then spin it in the direction that they want. Now, the direction they want is endless ambiguity. Gee, we don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. It's nonsense. We've proven what they are. Well, I have 755 whistleblowers.
You have 755 whistleblowers?
Yeah. I mean, this archive is unbelievable.
You had mentioned that you would want to debate Lou Elizondo.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I mean, someone brought that up a couple years ago. I don't have any animus towards him personally. I just know what his role and function is, because I was given a heads up on it as soon as he emerged out of the Pentagon and stood up his operation with this young guy I used to hang with, Tom DeLonge of Blink-182. He'd stay at my house in Virginia. But what you expect counterintelligence and disinformation agents to do is to do exactly that.
In a nutshell, Elizondo criticizes Greer for making money out of the phenomena. For example, here a cruise with a small group of people where they'll talk about disclosure. Lou's also selling a disclosure tour where he takes a small group of people and talks about disclosure. Both of them are publishing books. This is Lou's latest one, Imminent, and Stephen Greer's published several. Now, Greer's biggest criticism of Elizondo is that he tries to control the narrative, while Stephen Greer is notoriously difficult to get a straight conversation out of without putting himself squarely at the center of the narrative. The end result, frustratingly, is that the general public, whom they've both made such great efforts to reach, just see from the outside an already tiny niche of people further divided with animosity and infighting, which makes the field of ufology far less interesting as a whole. But that's where Jake Barber comes in, our new first-hand witness, and let's hear what they both have to say about him.
This is a big deal. This is a former tier one operator who's worked with several other agencies in the intelligence community, and what he has to say is, I think
no less than extraordinary. This is kind of one of the big breaks we were trying to create an opportunity where people like this individual could come forward, a special operator with firsthand knowledge of the UAP effort that the U.S. government is behind, that has been behind for a long time. If it turns out to be true that these individual, by the way, his credentials are impeccable. If it turns out to be true, then and right now I don't see any reason why not. What he's saying is panning out. I haven't personally vetted the individual, but I have spent the last year and a half working with other individuals trying to facilitate these individuals to come forward, this one in particular, and to have this conversation with the American people. The story is something that I haven't, I can't say that I haven't heard before. I have, but now it's finally being made public. There's a lot of things here to unpack. First and foremost, this is a person who has served their country honorably and has done so for many years and has lived in the shadows. Is not seeking fame, is not seeking notoriety, just wants to tell the truth. And I can certainly appreciate that. That's exactly how I feel. The individual does have some very significant concerns for their personal well-being, which I completely understand. Again, through firsthand experience, I understand what that feels like. But this individual decided to come out anyways and have the conversation, which I think should be applauded.
In the course of your high-value target investigation, you met Dr. Stephen Greer.
Yeah, I did.
What was the purpose of meeting Dr. Stephen Greer?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, you could say what you want about Dr. Greer, but the guy's been 30 years ahead of everyone else on a lot of the details of this subject.
So a lot of what he says is correct.
To me, he's like the Bentwaters. Like, we had everything we needed in 1980, and now we're fishing around for morsels of that. This guy, he's been ahead of everyone. And what I find quite funny is the one thing he gets the most shit for is the one thing he's probably most right about, and that is his CE5 protocol.
So CE5 is when he uses meditation and he claims it engages telepathically with the phenomenon.
Yeah, that's his term for it. Like, we don't use CE5. We don't use Dr. Greer's protocol. No do other people in the program or subsequent programs.
So CE5 is real?
Yeah, if we're going to use his term. I'll tell you what is real is the ability to go into something like a meditative state and summon UAP and pilot UAP. That is real.
And that's what makes this so profoundly interesting. Stephen Greer has no respect for Elizondo. Elizondo has no respect for Greer. And yet they are both in full support and backing of this new first-hand whistleblower, Jake Barber. So there's no other incentive here than the truth. And that makes this worthy of further investigation. So what are Jake's claims?
Jake Barber says that when he retrieved a so-called 8-gon-shaped UAP, he had an intense emotional reaction, which convinced him he'd connected telepathically with a non-human intelligence. You're talking UFOs, flying saucers, and...
That's probably one of the hardest conversations. That object, or whatever was controlling that object, was also connecting to me through the mind, through my mind.
And so, how did the object come to land?
I think it was invited to land by the Psionics team.
Jake says his mission that night came from no accidental crash. The UAP was summoned by a separate team, a special team with special abilities. They're called psionics. What is a psionic?
A psionic person is someone with the predisposition for extratemporal, you could say, abilities and sensitivities.
Extratemporal abilities, also known as psychic powers. What did you discover the psionics were being used for in the program?
In the program, there was certainly a desire to explore the idea that perhaps UAP could be summoned, could be communicated with, could be controlled, and could be persuaded to land, all by deploying people with psionic abilities.
And did you see that happen?
Yes, I did.
When a psionic operator engages with technology, how do they do it?
Using their mind, something like meditation.
There genuinely are people who can actually make a mental, spiritual connection to a technology.
Yes, 100%.
It all seems so far-fetched, psychically gifted humans linking with possibly alien ships, summoning them and even piloting them. But it isn't just Jake saying this. Don Paul, another decorated Special Forces operator and colleague of Jake's, says he's also seen what psionics can do.
I've had the pleasure of meeting multiple psionic assets. I've seen them function. I know that they're capable of doing what they're doing.
You can definitively say that you believe there is a capacity in the human mind to somehow psychically, telepathically connect.
Yes, and I don't know if it's a byproduct, if it's something that they were born with, but there is certain people who are quantifiably, verifiably capable of this.
It's an established fact that the Pentagon has had an interest in psychic abilities, what it calls remote viewing, for military purposes. The famed Project Stargate spent years studying the subject, and despite the CIA's official position that such studies yielded nothing, former Pentagon UAP investigator Lou Elizondo told me last year that psychic abilities are very real, and perhaps not very rare. So this is an ontological shock, I think, for many people watching this, because we're all being told, firstly, there's no such thing as aliens visiting this planet, and secondly, there's no such thing as telepathy or psychic abilities. It's rubbish.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think there is going to be an ontological shock. I think it's going to be an ontological relief, because I think everyone deep down knows that there's more to life than what we are being told and experiencing. Like, not only is it not shocking, but it should be welcome.
Now, this is slightly uncomfortable for me to say, because I hate putting myself at the center of the story. But one of the reasons that I find what Jake says so compelling is because when I had my first couple of encounters with whatever this is, and several since, a major aspect of it was this seemingly direct interface with my consciousness. And the way that you will hear Jake describe his encounter was almost perfectly parallel to the way that I felt when I had mine. So I'm not going to waste your time talking about mine now. You've probably heard me waffle on about it before. But let's listen to what he says.
You're in your chopper?
Yeah, I'm in my chopper.
What sort of chopper?
At the time, it was a Bell 212, which is the same as a UHN1. It's a twin-engine, twin-bladed Bell helicopter.
You're flying at night?
Flying at night, yeah.
What time at night?
Oh, God. I don't remember. Like, after midnight.
Have you been given any pre-flight briefing?
I'm the one who would be given the briefing, but we are given a loadout on the particular object. That when you're flying an external load, we designate two different sites. One's called the drop site, one's called the pick site, you could say. The pick site is where the payload is that you're flying in to pick up. As you're making your first trip into the pick site, the payloads are already rigged and manifested for you to prepare them for flight. When you're en route to that object, you're given some basic information like weight estimates, size estimates. And during the recovery of the object at nighttime, I make my way in the helicopter from where we configure the line and we fly to where what we call the pick site. There's two locations. We designate them pick site, drop site. Drop site at the delivery location. We have a crew both at the pick site and the drop site on the ground. The pick team configures the cargo for flight,
So whatever it is, the craft is sitting in a sling waiting for your helicopter.
Yeah, it's sitting. We have these things called pumpkins, which are like rubberized bags or containers. And from my point of view, it was covered in a pumpkin, at least from the bottom and the sides. This is one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my life I'm about to share with you. So bear with me. This is, for me, when it became clear. As I get closer to this pick site, I start feeling odd. I start feeling extremely emotional. And the closer I get, the more the emotion starts to overwhelm me. And
what do you feel? What's the emotion?
I feel a sense of my mother. I don't know how else to explain it. I feel this intense hybrid of sadness and happiness and beauty and song. And it was very disruptive to me because I had a very practical responsibility at the time to operate a helicopter in the mountains at night. And I began wondering what was wrong with me. It was late. Am I just stressed? Am I tired? Am I marinating in cortisol and estrogen? I don't know. But as I came over this object for the pick, there was this overwhelming sense of emotion.
What's it saying? The object. Tell me what you're feeling.
Like I said, it was an overwhelming sense of sadness, happiness.
Is it your feeling? Are you suddenly having a mental breakdown on the job?
No, I felt like something connected with me. I felt like something had tuned in to me and my soul and was providing me some sense of guidance on what to do and how profound what I was doing was. And it was so overwhelming that I began to cry. And
I can't imagine crying at nighttime with night vision goggles is the healthiest way to fly a chopper.
No, it is not. And then I'm confused as to why I'm crying at the same time. And then do I abort the mission? So I just did my best to focus on my particular cues when doing this type of work. And I got the load hooked up and I began flying away. And once it was just me and that object in between the pick and the drop site, there was about 20 miles in between, I felt like something was inside of me. I felt like I was possessed by the most beautiful spirit I'd ever been possessed by. And
was it loving?
It was loving. But there was a sense of sadness at the same time. And
had you ever had an experience like this before?
No, it was a very feminine energy. I'll tell you that. It felt like the spirit of God, but not in any masculine sense that I had ever felt. It was like, again, the feeling of my mother, and my daughter and beauty. And it wasn't like a soul, it was like a frequency that I was connected with.
Was it scared?
I don't know if it is a thing. I'm still trying to figure out why that happened. I don't want to say that because I have a pretty good idea of what's going on now. And whatever that force was since that night, it has stayed with me. And as crazy as this sounds, it's what's guiding me now. And it's what's providing protection for me. I've come to understand now, after being involved with other parts of the programs that are tested on the range, that there is a known and researched and implemented emotional or psychic, or what we call a psionic component to the research and development of the UAP program.
So You've had those two anomalous incidents with craft.
Yeah.
Clearly, these are objects that are being recovered that do not appear to be human technology.
So this is a good thing to talk about, because what we're dealing with is either non-human intelligence, if we want to use those words or that phrase or that acronym. It's either that, or we need to dramatically redefine what we think human intelligence is.
Because this object, whatever it was capable of communicating with you in your mind.
That object, or whatever was controlling that object, was also connecting to me through the mind, through my mind.
Now you learned, didn't you, that this was the tip of an iceberg. It wasn't
Correct.
just you.
Correct.
What did you learn?
Well, my work, coincidentally, shortly after that, led me in support of another particular part of the program, which deals directly with looking at this piece right here, which is there a component on the summoning side that we call, and the operation side of these non-human craft, that has to do with consciousness, or at least a field of consciousness that perhaps humans can tap into, and maybe all beings in the universe can tap into.
What is a psionic?
A psionic person is someone with the predisposition for extral, temporal, you could say, abilities and sensitivities. Someone who has a fantastic intuition.
What did you discover the psionics were being used for in the program?
In the program, there was certainly a desire to explore the idea that perhaps UAP could be summoned, could be communicated with, could be controlled, and could be persuaded to land, all by deploying people with psionic abilities to interface and communicate with the UAP.
And did you see that happen?
Yes, I did.
So
now, I've already made a whole series of documentaries called Psychics and Sources, which discusses the correlation and crossover between consciousness and the UAP phenomena. So I'm not really going to focus too much on that aspect here. But what we haven't really discussed is the weaponization of this. And that's what Jake describes in this next clip.
So let's go through the psionic program. When a psionic operator engages with technology, how do they do it?
Using their mind, something like meditation. And I need to preface this by saying this is stuff that I've come to know recently. The night that I had this experience, there was another team involved, come to find out was a psionics team, and they were also working that night.
And do you think it was them that had attracted the object in the first place?
Yeah, I do.
And so how did the object come to land?
I think it was invited to land by the psionics team.
Is that always how they make the objects land?
No, there's a number of other ways. So I have to tell you that weapon systems are tested out there.
I know this from other sources. I know that high pulse microwave weapons are being used to bring down some of these craft.
Yes.
Now, how often was it done where the objects would land on their own accord, and how often was it done that weapons would be used?
Yeah, I can't tell you how often. I can tell you they are brought down both ways, that they are invited to land by the psionics team. Other times they are invited in by the psionics team, but then HPMs, which are high-powered microwave weapons, are deployed, and they have an effect where they can disrupt the flight pattern of the object. And when it is an object, sometimes it's not, and it can result in that aircraft being forcibly brought down.
Now we're going to get into the moral and ethical side of shooting down something that you've just invited in a bit later in the video and later in the series. But for now, we're going to touch on some aspects of science which I can barely grasp, so do bear with me. Now luckily we've got my little assistant here, which is an electromagnetic levitation. So this orb is being held aloft by a strong electromagnetic field. it's also silent. This parallels many capabilities reported by UAP. Indeed, magnetism has been explored since the 1920s, if not further before, and has demonstrated some key, a foot in the door, if you will, to anti-gravity and propulsion. If you can generate a strong enough gravitational field, you don't suffer inertia, which is something that Bob Lazar has very publicly described in his account of the craft that he worked on. Now, in this Substack by Christopher Mellon, former Undersecretary for Defense, he describes the exact frequency which is given off by UAP. And I'm only speculating at this point, but anybody that stood too close to a guitar amplifier before will understand the concept of feedback. And whilst the screaming noise that comes out of it is constructive feedback, if you play the opposite wave, as we'll demonstrate in this little video here, you get destructive feedback, which can cancel out the wave. And if a craft is only holding itself in the air by a electromagnetic field, and you can cancel that out by directing a beam of high energy microwave at it, you can imagine it would have an incredibly disruptive effect on its ability to stay in the air. Here's Stephen Greer talking at the 2013 Citizen hearing about this back engineering project. So this is 12 years ago, and as Jake Barber said, he seems to be a bit ahead of the field.
Could we, let's see, could we now have Dr. Greer take 10 minutes?
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here again. I would like to open with sort of a historical overview of advanced technologies that began in the late 1800s with the breakthroughs with Maxwell and also Faraday. It turns out that the Maxwell equations that were developed had a number of changes that resulted in what is now classic electromagnetic theory. This has resulted in a number of errors in the equations, which have been corrected by people who have looked at them very carefully. Between the late 1800s and 1929, there were a number of breakthroughs that ended up being suppressed that had to do with creating very high voltage VHV systems so that you could create a vector into what's now been called the zero-point energy field. And I refer the panel to the Jane's Defense Weekly writer Nick Cook and his book, The Hunt for Zero Point. This began to be explored by people like Nikola Tesla and others. I have a Department of Defense document that is on a flash drive for each member of Congress that the conference has been given, the citizens' hearings has been given, that shows that when Nikola Tesla died, that this information that he had, which allowed for a car to run out of the ambient energy, was in documents confiscated by the FBI. And I have a Department of Defense document demanding that the FBI turn these over to the DoD. The FBI refused. At any rate, science continues because the laws of the universe are in fact universal, and they can be discovered here or around Alpha Centauri or any place else in the cosmos. By 1928 and 29, T. Townsend Brown, as well as the Kolosky-Frost experiment in physics in Germany, had determined that VHV, very high voltage systems, done in a certain resonant field could result in so-called electromagnetic-gravitic effect, the lifter effect that has been described, which you see in UFOs. They also can create what's called a space-time bubble around an object so that you can correct for 1G. This is how these objects are traveling at multiples of what any aerodynamic physics would describe, and can make right-hand turns without killing the occupants. Around this same time, there was, in the 1940s and the late 1930s, a number of UFO sightings. This included the so-called Foo Fighters. Yes, it's a famous rock group. However, the Foo Fighters took their name from the reports of these objects seen in the theater of World War II that were flying around our aircraft. We thought it was a secret weapon of the Nazis. The Nazis thought it was a secret weapon of ours. There was Jimmy Doolittle, the famous general. His
nephew is a dear friend of mine, and he has testified that General Doolittle was sent by FDR over to the European theater in World War II, investigated the Foo Fighters, and came back and told Roosevelt, and I quote, "They are interplanetary vehicles." So by then, there began a classified program, and which was augmented further by events, as mentioned, in 1941, and then, of course, the famous Roswell event. Those events led to, as Philip Corso describes, a reverse engineering program. As you all know from the famous Wilbur Smith document of 1951 from Canada, it talks about that flying saucers exist, but there's a high-level team headed up by Dr. Vannevar Bush that is studying the, quote, modus operandi of these vehicles. These were the most brilliant scientists, Edward Teller, Oppenheimer, and others, Hermann Oberth, amongst others, who were in this team studying how extraterrestrial vehicles move. In October of 1954, a key date I want the committee to remember, we have actionable intelligence from someone who has worked in the National Security Agency and has been in the vault. All of this went deep black because they figured out, at that point, gravity control. So since 1954, October of that year, we have not needed rockets, jets, internal combustion engines, and surface roadways between cities. I say this with authority that this is the case. Eventually, these breakthroughs in human discovery were complemented by the study of the extraterrestrial material that were retrieved from these events. And contrary to most people's thoughts, the Roswell event was actually a downing of an extraterrestrial vehicle by an electromagnetic system that was hidden in a radar dome that was switched on, and this is in an FBI document that I can provide for the committee and is on the flash drive given to the Congress. The result ultimately was that there were transdimensional physics that began to be studied that deal with the nexus between electromagnetism, energy generation, anti-gravity, and consciousness. And we have discovered that there is a nexus and that, in fact, there are electromagnetic systems that have been developed that can interface directly with what we call coherent thought, the same way that you can interface with a system with lasers, which is coherent light, where you sync up all the wavelengths. Ultimately, these breakthroughs were paralleled with amazing developments in the biological sciences and the experimentation with cloning. And this began many years earlier than was reported from Dolly the sheep in Scotland. This goes a little beyond, I think, what this committee wants to look into. However, you need to understand that the technologies that we have, and we were discussing, are not theoretical. We have actionable intelligence that any committee in Congress or executive action can find regarding current operations. And I just want to go through a list of them very quickly of these facilities and corporations for which we have witnesses who can be subpoenaed by the committees of the Congress. This was developed at the request of Congressman Christopher Cox of Orange County, with whom I met, and was later further developed for the briefing that we put together for President Obama. These facilities are the Edwards Air Force Base and subsections where, at the dry lake bed where the Lockheed Skunk Works operations, Haystack Butte, China Lakes, George Air Force Base, and the closed Norton Air Force Base, were an anti-gravity device, so-called alien reproduction vehicle, for which we have the schematics, was seen by Frank Carlucci and others on our witness team. Tabletop Mountain and Blackjack Control. The aerospace facilities there are the Northrop Anthill Facility, Tejon Ranch, the McDonnell Douglas Llano Plant, Lockheed Martin Hellendale Plant, and the Phillips Lab. At the Nellis Air Force Facility, so-called Area 51, no one calls it that. There's S4 and S12, Pahut Mesa, Groom Lake, and a number of sub-facilities. The most important facility is in Utah, near Provo, the Dugway Proving Grounds, all of which is underground, and the airspace above it is classified. There are no roads into this facility. The New Mexico facilities include Los Alamos National Labs with underground connectors to the so-called Dulce area where the biological work is being done, and Kirtland Air Force Base. And the complex there includes Sandia National Laboratories, Phillips Labs, Manzano Mountain Weapons Storage Facility, Coyote Canyon, and the White Sands Complex. In Arizona, near Fort Huachuca, which is Army Intelligence Headquarters, there is a UGB underground base where one of our witnesses, who will testify, worked on 9 separate extraterrestrial vehicles that had been down through advanced electromagnetic pulse weapons, and there are several different species of extraterrestrial biologicals stored at that facility. The other facilities, and this goes on, include a special compartmented area of Cheyenne Mountain, where we have witnesses in our team who can be subpoenaed, where we have tracked extraterrestrial vehicles in our solar system that were measuring 26 miles in diameter. There are also facilities in Australia, a key one being Pine Gap, the so-called Alice Springs facility, which is mostly a U.S. Air Force facility, even though it is in Australia. I recently talked to the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia about this. Also, the Redstone Arsenal and the Marshall Space Flight Center. We have a scientist at the Redstone Arsenal who works under contract for IT&T, who have developed these transdimensional systems. He was under contract with my project to bring these energy devices out, and he was then threatened by a former CIA director and what I call the Goon Squad that went down there 3 years ago in March. This is just part of the information we have, and this information is on the flash drive given, then that you're all welcome to review. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dr. Greer is not the only person talking about it. Here's a clip of Lou Elizondo discussing exactly the same militarized process of how to shoot down a UAP.
Elizondo says ATIP also identified another pattern. In several instances, UAPs have allegedly appeared near American nuclear facilities or weapons systems. Both the Nimitz and the Roosevelt are nuclear-powered.
We do know that there is a very significant interest that UAP have towards our nuclear technology.
A daunting thought, to be sure. But Elizondo says ATIP also developed a hypothesis that the UAPs might have an Achilles heel, a vulnerability that the American military can exploit. Electromagnetic pulses of some kind could bring down these craft.
Yeah, the general consensus was that these vehicles, their propulsion units, are susceptible to electromagnetic pulse, meaning they are using a technology that the electromagnetism, if they were to encounter a certain frequency of electromagnetism, would interfere with their ability to fly and maneuver.
Building on that hypothesis, Elizondo says his team devised an audacious secret plan to disable and capture one of those Tic Tacs.
We had proposed a honey trap to try to collect data and information on these UAP.
So this was an operation known as Interloper.
That is correct. So you have a nuclear-powered carrier with other nuclear-powered vessels, potentially nuclear-powered submarines, which also may have potentially nuclear weapons. So the idea is to create a nuclear footprint that is so irresistible to these things. We would create a trap, and then that trap would be sprung.
But Operation Interloper never made it past the planning phase. Interloper was stymied, wasn't it? It was scrapped.
It was scrapped.
It was a pretty good idea.
And it was approved by a lot of people, a lot of agencies.
And yet, when it finally got to the top, it was stopped. It was blocked. It's almost like somebody perhaps already knew the answer.
Or didn't want us having the answer.
Elizondo says the shelving of Operation Interloper was just one of several puzzling and frustrating setbacks to ATIP's mission.
So it seems that despite Lou Elizondo's claims that Operation Interloper never got off the ground, that it was already in full swing. And this leads to a far bigger question. Just like Dr. Ian Malcolm says, we're so preoccupied with wondering whether we could, we aren't stopping to think whether we should. And should we be tempting in some higher form of intelligence which has direct access to our consciousness, does not seem to abide by the laws of physics or time, and can certainly ignore the efforts of our greatest technology and soldiers? Look at David Fravor in the Tic Tac, one of the world's greatest fighter pilots. made a fool of by something that looked like a breath mint. Were the shoe on the other foot, and another intelligence was baiting in one of our space shuttles or one of our planes and then shooting it down for their own means, the repercussions would be extreme. We would consider that an act of war. Entire populations have been annihilated on less action than that in our own bloody history. So the arrogance of any particular agency or country to take such an aggressive act, to attempt to procure technology far beyond our own grasp, whilst also not admitting to the existence of that technology or intelligence behind it, beggars belief. Now, in part 2 of this series, we're going to get into some prior attempts to shoot down UFOs and how it has gone extremely badly in the past. But for now, I hope you really enjoyed this one, and I look forward to seeing you again. See you later.